this idea came about of doing our history presentation because the Museum of North Idaho contacted us, and they've been doing a series at the Coeur d'Alene Library, and they asked if we would do a presentation on the history of Spirit Lake, and I said, sure. And we're doing that in July, I think it's the 9th or 10th, but I thought, well, we should really do it for Spirit Lake, so that's what this is about. And unfortunately, we don't have a really big screen. I think it's mostly for me to remember what I'm talking about, that I'll be doing my section. And then I've asked Ole Hohman, whose family has been critical to the history of our town, and he will explain his role in it. And you see the title is Boom, Bust, Bloom. And the boom was because our town was built all in 1 year. It was a genuine boom town. And when I tried to look up, what other boom towns around here developed like this, and it mostly is referred to ghost towns, because when there's a boom, it was usually in a mining community. They built a fast little town out of wood shanties, and then they found that there wasn't any ore, and they moved on. So our boom town was not designed that way. They built it with cement blocks and mortar. They wanted it to be a long-term town, and we'll learn about that. But it did have a bust, and that bust was the fire of 1939. And now we feel like we're blooming again. The museum exists, which we didn't have before. There are a lot of things that, a full Main Street is a new thing too, having most occupation, or most of the places occupied on Main Street. Althea and I moved here in 1982, and so we've been here a long time and seen a lot of those changes. We didn't always live here steady, but we kept our pottery business going there. Anyway, I'll go ahead with our program. Thank you all so much for coming. It's great to have a full house. Okay, so we'll be seeing more of the mill here. That was the mill that was what caused the town to be. Before there was the mill, before there was anything, the first white settler in the area was Pete Rodebeck, who arrived in 1881. And he had been a buffalo hunter, which actually we know now was sort of a program to try to kill off all the Indians by starving them to death. So he was the one that told some reporters from back east who came out to visit him at his Sylvan Lake the myth of the founding of Spirit Lake, which you now see on the Mercantile building, about the Indian maiden jumping to their death. And I did a little more research about that. I thought I'd seen a similar story in a poem called Hiawatha by Longfellow. But when I was researching it today, if you go to Wikipedia and do Lover's Leap, there's about 50 cases in the United States. And they also had a quote from Mark Twain, who said, along the Mississippi River, there's at least 30 cases of a lover's leap where some Indian maiden leapt to her death. So it's very stereotypical and kind of suspect. But for some reason, the Native Americans did not seem to have a long presence here. You don't find a lot of artifacts from them. But I came up with this theory just the other day. Knowing how much snow we get here in the winter, and they would be wise to know enough to know that just a few miles to the south or a few miles to the west, there wouldn't be such bad winters. There might be a reason they didn't live here. But there was the I wish I could say it right, the Senequatine Trail, which there's a part of our the Spirit Shores has that name to it. That was an Indian trail that later became a wagon trail to town and up over to almost Priest River, and that later became the roads into. But there were no roads in the 1880s. But there was the railroad that came through the area. The Northern Pacific route came through, and then later, just before we started, the Great Northern route came through. And as a result, the government gave square miles of land, every other square mile, to the railroad for their doing this thing, which was helping the country. And so Marion Wharton, who was married to Colonel Sam, the old Wharton, bought a section of land, which is currently where the town of Spirit Lake lives, or exists, and she sold that, and they moved over to Medical Lake. But she sold it to Frederick Blackwell, and he's the founder of our community. And I will say that a lot of the stuff I'm telling today is found in our book, although I did a lot of independent research and tried to make it interesting. You can see the picture of him with a car. That was like in the 1930s probably. But he was a lumberman from back east. Williamsport, Pennsylvania was his hometown. You'll see that name again. He came out here looking for timber, and he found it in great quantities in our area. And he had some backing of money from back east. And in this area, he was huge. He put an electric railroad from Spokane to Coeur d'Alene that ran right onto the dock. It ran on electricity. And in order to put in electricity, he had a dam built at 9 Mile Falls, Washington, the first hydroelectric dam in the area. And they started selling the excess power off for people to have for lights and everything. So he was a real innovator. It wasn't like he invented it, but he was using all the new technology of the time, electric railroads. And anyway, he bought this section of land, and immediately they started promoting it. And I found ads when I was doing newspapers.com, full-page ads in Minneapolis papers telling about this wonderful new town out in the west. Here it says, "Get a new start in a new country, Spirit Lake. Free lunches are not served. Auction sales are not held. Lots are not given away. Brass bands are unnecessary." And then it's all about 1,000 men are now at work in Spirit Lake. And this was in the fall of 1907. So the first building in the new town site, I like to feature this. Does anybody recognize that building?
Like the Sondahl building.
That was the Sondahl pottery. And when we bought the place in 1983, it kind of looked like that. It had a little lean-to on the back. It was in a different location than where it was originally. Originally, this building was next to what was the bank, and it's hard to remember all the things it's been. Real Life was there for a while, across from the hardware. The big building across from the hardware was just on the other side of that. Okay, so what really got the town going was, besides lumber, he was into railroads, and he got a chance to meet James J. Hill, the empire builder, who put in the Great Northern Railroad. And in the 1990s, I'm not sure when the Great Northern was completed, but he was inspired by railroads as being a way to make a lot of money by moving lumber, moving people. And so he saw Spirit Lake as being the gem of his new community. He got the railway depot designed by the same person that designed the Davenport Hotel. And he got brand new engines, brand new freight cars. And this is a picture of the town under construction in either early 1908 or late 1907. The town was officially in January 1908 was when it was started. This is the way it looked by 1916, and it looks very similar today if you're standing about across the street from the pottery and looking up. This is a picture of it in the winter, and this little thing says Spirit Lake Land Company, so the other buildings were starting to dwarf it, and quite a few of those are gone, but some remain. And here is a view of the mill down at the bottom with the mountains of the Coeur d'Alene Mountains up in the background, like Cedar Mountain looking towards Farragut. It's a view most people don't get unless you climb up on the ridge and take pictures from up there. But the railroad facility was also supposed to be first class. They built a roundhouse in it so that they could turn the engine around, although they continued the track on up to Medellin Falls. And besides the town of Spirit Lake, Ione, Washington also got a mill, and it was on that same rail line and was founded by Blackwell as well. And up in Medellin Falls, he had a major interest in the cement plant, which produced the cement which was used for building the buildings in Spirit Lake and in Spokane and in the whole area. So let's see, this is again the view looking down from the hill with the railroad depot on the right and the mill on the left. But besides all the working that was going on, they also knew about tourism, and As I said, he built an electric railroad that would end right on the dock in Coeur d'Alene, so you could hop onto a steamer and go out on Lake Coeur d'Alene. And he had the same idea basically for Spirit Lake. And he and other local businessmen brought in the Chautauqua. And we still have that name at one of the resorts along the lake. But I only learned recently, Ole was saying this week, he told me the Chautauqua actually went right from across the bridge for over a half mile to the Beha place. If anybody knows where that is, it's a good mile of shoreline. So it was a major chunk of the lake. So starting in about 1908, they were having this Chautauqua. People would ride out from Spokane or from farther places to come and recreate in our community. They built a special bridge to get across for the use of the Chautauquas, but they also built it strong enough so that trucks could haul materials up. There'd never been a road up on that side of the lake. And so initially the steamships were important to haul stuff up and down the lake, but it was slowly replaced by trucks. Now in town, he also thought that big parks are important to the community. And so we have what we call Big Park. We could call it Blackwell Park, because that's what he called his park in Coeur d'Alene, which became the Coeur d'Alene City Park. And it was a 20-acre park, and I'm sure that's bigger than what you see now in Coeur d'Alene. It would probably include the NIC site along the river and head. It was like an amusement park. Anyway, the city eventually renamed it from Blackwell to City, and we just call our park Big Park. Now, on the left is the big park, and there's a fountain in front of it with lots of little ears of rock sticking out. That lump is still in the park with most of those pieces broken off. Is still visible in Big Park. And down at the lake, as you head down to the lake on the left, when you look off, you'll see the fountain from the fountain park or the railroad park. That was had a steel top on, kind of that would make the water splay down over the side. So that was the view from the depot. We were also the buckle on the snow belt, and this picture from 1913 showed the kinds of snows that we get here in the winter sometimes. This shows the paint shop and the Panhandle power plant. The power plant, energy from the heat that was produced by the power plant was sent up in hot water pipes or steam pipes up into some of the buildings that were owned by the Panhandle Mill Company. So it was not technically a company town in that they didn't own everything in the town, but they had a good share of the residences that were owned by the company. This was the tug, the Williamsport, named after his hometown in Pennsylvania. It was owned by the company, but it was run by locals. It would haul supplies up to the logging camps at the end of the lake at Brickle Creek. There was a flume that brought logs down Brickle Creek, and they would haul the log booms down the lake with this tugboat. I wanted to talk about the schools briefly because they have always been important to the community. The first school was actually held in our little pottery shop because people were in town, but there was no place to put the school yet. It was being built, so they had a class in our two-room little shop. But immediately they built this first school, and then eventually they added on to it, so that this was the original school. This was a gymnasium, and this is what's now called the Woolen Brown Center, and that's all that's left of the old school. Just to show you a picture of, these are some from the girls' basketball team of 1909, and Spirit Lake baseball 1910. Sports have always been important in the community, as we see now in the parks today. And here's a picture of the Hohman Brothers service station. So we're moving into like the 1920s or 30s. All we can tell is history, and I'm going to introduce him in a minute. His Uncle Jum is here, and his father Cliff is there, and they ran a service station, and maybe he can tell us where that was located also. This is the picture of his parents, Mr. and Mrs. Cliff Hohman, and this is his Uncle Jum with a truck. You can see that the tires, there were no tires on that truck. It had solid rubber wheels because that's the way they built them right then. I think that's about, we're getting to the time of August 1939, which was the bust. This is a picture of the lumber in the yards. And if you look at it, you can see stickers going up the side. There's space between them because they didn't kiln dry the lumber. They dried it with little stickers between it. And that's a great way to build a forest fire or a campfire if you put air between the branches. So this was just a huge fire waiting to happen. Oops, I gotta go back. So we're going to hear.
Well, the fire was over this way. He pointed to the north on the slope. And he said, the men over there, you're going to relieve them. And they should be coming out any time now. And so with our shovels, we started ambling over in that direction, but we haven't gone very far. When all at once, a fellow came running out of the area over there, and we thought, well, that's strange. Why in the world is he in such a hurry? And he said, you're not going to go in that direction. He says the fire just broke loose, and a little snag fell across. We tried to contain it. But the fire got away from us, and he said, we've got to get the hell out of here and turn around and get down that mountain fast, because it's coming. It got into the trees, and sure enough, some fellows came running out of there in that direction and down to where we were, and we all got back into that truck. Instead of relieving them, we were going to be getting out of there with them. And so that's what happened. We went back down the mountain to the edge of the lumber yard. When we got down there, we found out that the fellows fighting the fire in that area had managed to put firefighters' hoses into the water with the pumps. And then the long line of fire hoses stretched quite some distance over to where we had come down the mountain. And fellows, he said, we're fighting against time. He said, I don't know how much time we have. He said, maybe 20 or 30 minutes, but he said, that fire is going to be coming right down on top of us. So he said, let's hose down the woods all along the edge of the forest here. And so that's what we did. There were 5 or 6 of us on one hose, and
Okay, so that was Harold Skinner, who was recorded right in this corner of the museum a couple of years ago. Is he 100 yet? He's 100 years old. And he's still active as a fiddler in the old-time fiddling community. And we were happy he'll probably be here again for the ice cream social this spring and at the 4th of July. And you can talk to him about his experiences fighting the fire at that time. So there's a scene of the fire burning up all that lumber, millions of board feet of finished lumber, close-up detail. And this is the aftermath, just empty rails. They used electric trains to push the lumber around in the yard, and that's the empty yard. And this was people waiting, thinking they were going to have to leave the town because it was so much... The wind was blowing it towards town. They weren't able to stop it, but the wind shifted and moved back towards Blanchard and finally died out without burning any community at that time. Anyway, so that's the scene after that, and we'll let Ole now pick up the story with his family trying to put together the pieces after the fire.
I want to have a little fun for a minute, so everybody take a piece of paper if you don't have anything to write on.
Yeah.
Very good. And do you want to make sure everybody has something to write with? We're going to have a 3-question test before we start, okay? And if you don't get it right, you can't leave. You just gotta keep trying. You gotta, just kidding. My name's Hohman, and my dad and uncle, I've spoke once before, I don't want to repeat what I talked about, but my uncle came in 26, and he had a service station that Brad showed in 1928, and I'll pass this around, but digging through some papers, I found an old statement, and it's from 1930, and then the year is left blank, so they could fill it in and use it several times, but it says Spirit Lake Garage, gas, oil, accessories, and general auto repair, and that's what my uncle did. And they had gas pumps, and as near as I can remember, and Keith Spencer, the guy that wrote the book, he used to go, his dad drove school bus, and before he went to school, he'd ride with his dad, and then they'd stop and talk with my uncle at this garage and stuff, and then he'd go pick up the kids and deliver them out in rural area and stuff. But he said that Spirit Lake Garage was on 4th and Rhode Island. But that just gives you an idea how big Spirit Lake was. I've seen figures of 3,000, I've seen figures of 2,000, but I know it was between the two at that time. And of course, the railroad was here until 26, the shops. It was the main repair shop for the railroad in this area. Matter of fact, they thought about making it division headquarters, and then Coeur d'Alene went out, and so the shops left here in 1926. And then the fire in 39 came, and some people said it burnt the mill. It didn't burn the mill, but it burnt most of the lumber around the mill. My dad at that time was a Standard Oil distributor. He had the gas station where Priest River Ministries is, kind of kitty corner from where Dave's Hardware was. Well, he and my mom ran that. He had a truck that had a big, I don't know if it was 250 gallon, whatever, but he would deliver fuel to the rural area, to the logging camps, whatever, in the 30s. And so they had a decision to make. When the fire came, the mill ran for another year and a half till 1941. They had a bunch of white pine that they could rail up from Deary and Beauville up to the mill. But a lot of people left town in 1939. A bunch more left in 1941 when the mill shut down, had a big auction. My dad and uncle had to decide, do we stay in business here, or do we leave? And they decided, hey, let's stay. And they went to the bank at Rafter and borrowed the money, and they went ahead and bought 48 houses in Spirit Lake. That's how many houses the mill had. There was actually more than that, and some got moved before that. But anyway, they bought 48 houses. A year later, a guy came up to my dad and said, how'd you like to double your money? My dad said, well, that sounds good. What do you got in mind? And he said, well, I know what you paid for those houses, and I'll pay you double for them. And my dad said, well, what are you going to do with them? And he said, well, I'm going to move some to Coeur d'Alene, I'm going to move some to Spokane. And my dad said, no, I didn't buy them to make money. I want the town to stay here and the people in it. So I remember as a kid, him getting calls all the time, you know, my water's frozen, the toilet's plugged, whatever, and Dave wasn't here to help. Okay, the test we're going to have right now. I want to kind of get you into what it was like living in the 1930s and 40s. So the first question is, what was the wage for working at Panhandle Lumber Company in the mid-1930s? Just take a guess, whatever.
25 cents an hour.
Anybody know?
$1 a day?
25 cents an hour.
That might be a little low, $3.65 a day. So you multiply that, and it's almost $80 a month. All right, the next question is, if you were a naval recruit, 1942, and you enlisted over at Farragut, you're at Farragut Naval Base, what do you think they got? This is per month.
$100.
If you go over to Sweet Lou's, they got a book and it talks about it, $50. And then when you got through training, you got 54. You're in the big
Room and
bucks.
board over there. For
Yeah.
$50,
Yeah, well, you know, okay. And then the third one, what was the rent for a house in the mid-40s after my dad bought the 48 houses? Got to remember, Spirit Lake went from 2,000, 3,000 to 623. And I remember that. I was born in 40, and I remember in the early 50s, it was 623, and we figured maybe they even cheated on the count. It wasn't quite that big. But anyway, most of the rent was between $10 and $25 per month.
Yeah.
Times changed.
Yeah.
Waterfront, my dad in the 50s bought, he and Chum, nobody wanted waterfront. There was one, I don't know if this is true, but I can't dispute it, but Patsy Allward, her family lived in the big cabin, which is next door to where my wife and I live, up at the head of Spirit Lake. And Panhandle Lumber Company built that cabin in 1909. It doesn't have any trusses. It has a cable that goes from one end to the other and a turnbuckle in the middle that you tighten to keep it straight. That's the same here?
Yeah. Well, they had steel rods, that table.
Okay, yeah, that's the same exact, thank you. That's a good visualization of it. There was just one, and the little house that we lived in that we tore down in 2000, it started out as being a blacksmith shed for the horses for Panhandle Lumber. And my dad's in-laws decided, hey, we would like to come out to Spirit Lake. They love to pick huckleberries and be there in the last part of July and August. One worked for Naval Supply, the other for Modern Machinery. And they said, can we take that old blacksmith shed and make it into a kind of a summer cabin? And so they started, well, that's what my wife and I and kids would stay in the summertime when we'd come here. It wasn't on the big cabin, and that cabin wasn't on permanent foundation. The mill made big stringers, 6x6s, 6x8s, and put rock under it and built a house on it. And of course, it got pretty cold when the weather changed and whatever. Well, anyway, my dad became mayor in 1942. I think because nobody wanted to be mayor in 1942. So he's faced with, what do you do with the town that's about 4 times bigger than it should be, and how do you pay to keep the streets, the water system? I don't know if any of you seen in the back the old water main, the wooden main with metal casing around it. Anyway, they had to do that, and I can't remember how many streets wide Spirit Lake is, but it starts down by where we're talking, the railroad tracks and the big park that Blackwell had. That was First Street. That used to be a main street, and then over the years, people left there and it's pretty well closed off. And then The next street is Second. It goes all the way up to 10 where the high school is, and then it goes beyond that. So let's say it's 14 blocks wide, and then you start counting the states and how many streets is it going the other way. It's a big town to take care of. Well, two things happened to help the town. First of all, World War II and Farragut. And many of the people who worked at the mill and stayed ended up working over at Farragut, constructing Farragut Naval Base. And my wife's dad was an example. He did a lot of electrical work and construction stuff. And he was in charge of the German prisoners of war, which was kind of interesting. One of them made him a ring. And if you ever get a chance and you go to Sweet Lou's, they've got a binder up at the front desk that's got a lot of the history. There's a lot of pictures on the wall, but they've got that binder that talks about how big Farragut Naval Base was and where it was laid out and all that. Well, then the second thing that happened to help out, of course, was the war, and good, better times came, and that kind of got Spirit Lake out of the Depression and stuff. So then my dad, there wasn't a doctor in town, and the first thing he did, he recruited Doc Frederickson. He was an Army doctor from North Dakota. He lived with us for about 3 months till his family could move. And they moved and lived originally right across from the school. And he stayed here and was a doctor. I remember going to the hospital one time. I had a toe that got infected, and he did some surgery and stuff. And he was a great guy and great family and stuff. And he left in 1960. Well, then my dad tried to go ahead and get some industry here, and that proved to be a really difficult thing. And in the 50s, my dad and uncle ran cattle. They had about 300 head of cattle, and we hayed the meadow that we still own and a bunch of other fields around the dam and the other side of the lake. And then my dad had the garage next to Brickle Creek Coffee and owned the property that is the frontage on 41 by Brickle Creek Coffee, and then the private school diagonally across. And you'd buy government surplus equipment, Caterpillars, graders, trucks, whatever, power wagons, fire trucks, and sold those. And then he started the same business in Post Falls, and of course it grew really fast. And my folks left in 1959. But his love for Spirit Lake, he spent most of the spring through the fall up at Spirit Lake, even though his business was at Post Falls. And in 1973, he talked me into leaving teaching, and we came and put in Spirit Shores, the 48 house development below town. And he always thought that was a way to kind of repay Spirit Lake for all the good memories that he had. That's pretty much my end of it. Any questions? Okay, thank you very much.
Well, I came here in 1976 and bought a house for $25,000. And my house had steam heat radiators in it, which we had to bust up to be able to use our basement. I currently live in the house next door, And I do have a cable in my roof, so I can relate to what you're talking about. When we came here, I started teaching in Rathdrum at the junior high there because that was the only place there was a junior high. So I had to commute every day. Junior high here had not been built. And so that was my beginning here. I eventually, our family, because my husband was working at the hospital in Sandpoint, we went up there for a while and lived in the Sandpoint area. A number of years before I retired, I started living here back in Spirit Lake, very happily because, as we know, Sandpoint has just exploded, and it was nice to come back to this little town. And so came back here, and a couple years after I retired, I got involved at the Senior Community Center, and I started working there and running the Community Senior Center. And it was my assumption that, oh, we're in a little town, we'll just all start working together and check in with other nonprofits, and that came to a quick halt. And I thought, well, this doesn't really work, and I wasn't too happy about that, trying to work with other groups. To me, it's just the natural way to go. And when you work in community, that's when the magic happens. So I kept trying to make inroads, and some of us were having coffee with people at other nonprofits and trying to get to work together. And then finally, after quite some time, there was a situation that happened, kind of a bust situation, you might say, that pushed us together. And I am been involved with feeding the community along with the food banks and a Cup of Grace. And what happened is, and it's still happening, is that the bounty of food we used to be able to pass out to our community started to decline, and it still is very minimal these days. I'm not sure if you're aware of that. We deal with all sorts of agencies trying to get food for our community, and at Christmas time we used to Cup of Grace, the community center, the food banks were all giving out boxes to for Christmas and Thanksgiving. Well, we kind of seized the moment at that time to figure out that, you know, if we all work together, because we're not getting a lot of stuff, that it might work a little bit better. And so that was the key thing that pulled us together. We all gathered together and we made one nice box for Thanksgiving and Christmas instead of minor boxes at all these different places. And people would ask, well, how many, you know, can I go here, but can I also go there? We just began working together. Well, that was a great success, and we said, let's continue this. So we, just about that time, I was cued in on my computer to a group called Innovia. It's a foundation in the Northwest that is very good at funding, and they had this advertisement that they were giving summit on Community Heart and Soul. Well, there's a few of us here in town that knew what Community Heart and Soul was all about. It's about your community working together to create bigger and better things. And I talked a friend of mine into going to the conference, and we went and we were just delighted. They had a lot of information, and so we came back and we brought information about that. And while we were there, we had a guest speaker, and he talked about the 13 ways to kill your community. Well, I picked up the book, and I said, oh my gosh, this is Spirit Lake. And I started to have a panic attack because I don't want to see that happen because I love this little town. And so we kind of passed these books around, started reading about it and what things that need to really happen to make your community thrive and be vibrant and sustain itself, because there's a lot of examples of a lot of small farming towns around here that are not, they're dwindling and dying, and there's certain reasons for that. We are currently working with a lot of those, in contact, I should say, with a lot of those who are also on the same track as we are here in Spirit Lake to continue to make our town a vibrant one with managed growth and smart choices for our community. So this was we went to another Innovia conference, and he was also there, and he has another book about the 8 essentials that you need in your community, and those are the things that we're working on. So we started talking about Community Heart and Soul. Community Heart and Soul began on the East Coast with a group who decided their town was dying and what could they do about it. So they started having some meetings and some potlucks, they got together, they tried a number of different things, and other towns started coming to them and saying, what are you doing here? What are you doing? Your town's looking better, things are happening, we're hearing all sorts of positives. They said, well, let us write this up because we've made a lot of mistakes and we don't want you to have to go down those roads and do it. So they formed a group called the Orton Foundation. You can look them up, Community Heart and Soul Orton Foundation. You can look them up on the internet and it tells all about that. So we started tossing that idea around of using it here with the group that we had started with and having a way in which to organize us. And we were throwing Heart and Soul out in social media, and one day we get a call from Inovia out of Spokane because they were supporting that whole Heart and Soul project. And they started asking us about what we were doing, and they were liking what they were seeing, and they encouraged us to fill out the grant, and by and by, they said, you're in, and we got $20,000 to continue our work. We have a project coordinator, and we are working with the program. They have a set program, and they come and teach us. This is the original booklet that you can download from the internet. Tells you a little bit about it if you're interested. Kind of a framework for how to work your community into a positive direction. Because, you know, when you get a bunch of people together, there's lots of ideas and you go all sorts of different ways. So we started with that, and then we started saying, well, what can we do? That we were still in the grant writing process. So we started forming some committees. And one person said, let's just tackle the low-hanging fruit. So that's what we started out doing. We went to the park and we repaired some stuff. We had people sanding down those wooden tables in the park. They cleaned up the park. We painted in the park. We cleaned up Main Street. We fundraised for replacing the dead trees that were downtown. We have a gentleman, I don't know if you've been down to the beach lately, but you won't find any goose poop because he's out there at 6 o'clock every morning sweeping it up for us all. And he's part of the coalition. And so we're just a bunch of volunteers who are working very hard to make our community a lot better. I was at a meeting one day and the person said, well, isn't that the city's responsibility when we were working in the park? Well, we've attended quite a few conferences that have mayors from little towns, council people, all that, and they have the same problems as we do. There's not enough money, not enough people, so we just said, yes, maybe that's, in normal situations with cities with lots of money, that might be the case that you can have your city take care of it, but this is our community, we love it, and so we want it to work. And that takes volunteers doing that to make it work. So as we got the grant from Inovia, they said, well, we're going to come over there. We have a core group, and we have a group that does the committees that do the low-hanging fruit. And those were some of the activities that we do. We are also responsible this year for the 4th of July parade and event. We took on the farmers market that's from 4 to 7 every Thursday here. We do that. We just started our lunch program, which is in the park with a shed, and we feed kids there every day, Monday through Friday, from 12 to 2, and luckily that's been wonderful, people coming and saying, here's a donation, here's some food, it's just wonderful to see it happen, and that's the magic of community. So the other part is a core group of people that are working on the dynamics of how do you form this community, how do you keep it organized, how do you keep it going in the right direction. And so Inovia sends its team out and helps us. They actually sent the people from Vermont out at our first meeting, and they came all the way out and they were very impressed. They said, ooh, we'd like to live in this community, and that made us all feel very good because they heard what we were doing and what we were up to, and a lot of times it takes a lot of time for cities to start moving in that direction with the number of people that we've been working with. And then they took us through phase 1, which is learning how to work in our community, how to draw people in, how to start assessing our community. The core group, the committees have things to do in town. And the core group, though, has the structure of how things are going to happen, to learn, and to be able to become what Inovia calls a heart and soul community. It's only a 2-year process, but then we can call ourselves a heart and soul community, helps us how to organize. Currently, one of our responsibilities is to collect data, because we're trying to not represent just what we like here in town, but we're trying to represent the town. We want young kids, we want older people, we want to hear from everyone. And what we're doing in that process is data collecting, because Inovia wants us to choose a large project in the future. We're doing all the low-hanging fruit, and we'll continue to do that, but they want us to choose a big project. And that big project will be generated from the community. And we're not sure what that's going to be, but you can't find out what that is unless you assess all of your community. I was on a segue here. I used to be on planning and zoning, and a comprehensive plan is what we were working on, and it's supposed to tell us what we want in our community and how we want our community run and what our community needs to look like, and do we have a theme? How do we check ourselves in 3 to 5 years if we're making progress? Well, the city's idea at that particular point in time was, well, let's just send it to a company and they'll fill it out for us. Well, that was kind of disconcerting. Some of the cause why I didn't want to be on planning and zoning anymore, but when you do a comprehensive plan from your town, you really need to hear from the people in it. And that's what we're doing right now. We're collecting the data from what our community wants to see here. Not what somebody made up at some business that might be what we think we like here. So to move the city, because the city works for us, to move the city in the direction that our community wants, you collect data. So we are collecting data, and I'm going to have you, we have these little cards here, and if you'd like to fill one out, we'd like you to do that. It is a demographic on the back about your age group and that type of thing. We don't need a name on there, we don't want one. And then it has questions like, what do you love about Spirit Lake? And we'd like you to think seriously about what you love. We ask children this, we ask everybody, we're at the farmer's market, where people are filling these out. And it says, what change would you like to see in Spirit Lake? This is an important first step of our data. And so the second step that we're working on also is that we're asking people, we call it storytelling, we're asking people to tell us stories. We have specific questions that we ask and a manner in which we ask them. And from that, we will have our project coordinator will be pulling out the data. So when we go to the city or to a grant funding group, we'll say, this is what our community wants. And they'll say, well, where's your data? Well, we'll have it. And if you know anything about that, everybody wants that. Everybody wants the verification for that. And so I believe that if we have the data, that we can drive what goes on at the city. And also when we have asking for grants, and there's quite a few of them out there that we're eligible for, we could do some great and positive things with that, and we would have the data to back that up. And so that's where we're headed now. We'll go into a few more phases in our gathering, and then I think towards the end of our whole process in 2 years, we'll be looking at trying to create an endowment for our community, so we're ongoing, and that we're bringing people up who are younger and moving forward that way. We attend a lot of different conferences. We just went to the Main Street America conference last week. Tells us about what many little towns are doing to make their main street popular, and having people come in and utilize business there, and how they're growing successfully. We've been to Inland Northwest Partners conference, which like I said before, has many mayors and people from other small towns, and we're talking and sharing ideas and trying to bring back positive information for the growth of our community. So we're on a 2-year journey as a heart and soul community, and the coalition is vested in making it happen and wanting to add more and more people to our group because many hands make light work. And so that's where we're at right now. And we have a number of coalition members here today too. We represent almost every nonprofit in town. We have church people here, in coalition. We have people who work in the Cup of Grace and the community center and the food banks and just a whole bunch of people. And we cross and combine and we work together as a team, which is something I've been wanting to see for a long time. And like I said, when communities work together and grow, that's when the magic happens. So that's what it's all about. So thank you. Are there any questions? I'm kind of scatter, throw it out there type of person, but do you have any questions about what we're doing? We'd love to answer any questions that you might have about what we're doing. We'd love to have, currently we have a number of people of a certain age, and then we are looking for people, families with children in school. We're getting a few, but we'd like to have more because that's the up and coming. So we'd like to have their information and their concern and their volunteerism. I know in that age group, in the 40s and 50s, you're busy working, but sometimes it's only an hour here or there that we donate time cleaning up the parks before the season started with baseball and all that. So if you want to get involved, we're available. In fact, this next week on Wednesday evening at 6 o'clock, we'll be meeting at the community center, and we'll be discussing more of what we're talking about here and meeting as a group. So if you're interested, come on down. So, any questions? Okay, thanks.
Thank you so much again for your interest in coming, and I hope that you'll take time to look around. Again, we have an amazing history that is, I think, particularly moving with the way that people have committed their lives to making a difference. And we heard, again, particularly thank yous to Oleg and his family, to Mona and the coalition, for all that's happening now.